All right, we've got an awesome guest on today. Good friend of mine, Storm Miller. I know everyone's going to enjoy hearing from Storm. He's going to bring a lot of good insight. And, Storm's someone I've been wanting to have on the podcast for a while. Number one, he's just an awesome dude and someone I've gotten to know pretty well over the last couple of years and consider him a good friend. But beyond that, he's an expert in financing franchise investments. And, I'm excited to have you on today, Storm, to talk about some of this because a lot of the people I work with, there's a common misconception that I see all the time. And that's, hey, Wes, I don't have, several $100,000 in the bank, or I don't have, $1 million plus net worth. How could I ever afford to invest in a business or much less a franchise business? And, so there's a lot of different options out there that someone could explore when it comes to getting the funding that they need for an investment in a business, and particularly franchising, which is what you've kind of specialized in. So really excited to have you share some of that information. I think it'll be very educational for everyone listening in. And I think, people will realize that, even if you don't have, a ton of capital on hand, there are many different great options that someone could explore to get the funds that they need to invest in a franchise business. And, with franchising, there's so many different options out there, and there are opportunities across all different investment levels. And Storm and the company that he's been working with have a lot of options for anyone across that spectrum. So Storm has been with a company called Benetrends Financial for the last 5 or 6 years, and has really become an expert in lending, in particularly to people looking to start a franchise business. And Storm, in my opinions, the foremost expert out there. He's the guy that I went to when my wife and I were looking to get financing for one of our franchise businesses. So, Storm, thanks for joining us, man. Welcome to the Path to Freedom podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on today, Wes. Appreciate all the work that you and I have been able to do together over the last couple of years, and congratulations to you on taking the next steps as an entrepreneur. Obviously, you and your wife just bought a franchise, so congratulations on that. I know that's going very well.
Yeah.
And then stepping into your new role as a franchise consultant.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think you're going to have a ton of success in that. You probably can speak to franchising in a little bit of a different way than most, because you've now kind of operated on all different sides of that fence as a franchisee, as a franchisor, and now as a franchise consultant. So obviously you're a believer in franchising, and I appreciate you being a believer in me and a believer in what some of Benetrends has been able to accomplish over the last 40 years.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I appreciate it. This is a next chapter for me that I'm super excited about, but, it's been great getting to know you and working with you over the last couple years, and, glad that we'll be able to continue to work together just in a different capacity than what we have in the past. So, maybe start off by, just giving everyone listening in a little bit more of your background. I mean, I just gave a very high level overview. So, maybe share with everyone a little bit more about, what you've been doing for the last, 5 or 6 years, and just give us some details on Benetrends.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is really, it's always been in financial services, right? Started out in wealth management and worked for a variety of different companies in that capacity my first few years out of school, and eventually came across a group called Benetrends Financial. And Benetrends Financial is the largest and the oldest full-service funding provider to the franchise industry in North America. So they've been in business for a very long time. I believe 2020 is their 38th year in operation.
Wow.
And I have been with Benetrends Financial for the last 5 years, working in a variety of different roles, but most recently as the national sales director over there. So really what I was doing for the company was driving relationships with individuals like yourself, whether it be franchise consultants, whether it's franchisors, and creating relationships with different individuals who are working with people who want to become franchise owners, and providing funding solutions for those individuals that are looking to buy a franchise. And the thing that I can really appreciate about Benetrends' approach to working with people is it is truly consultative. There are a number of different programs that we offer individuals who are buying franchises that may or may not be the right fit for them. So our goal as a funding consultant is to basically guide them through some of the different programs that may make sense and build out a funding strategy that allows them to accomplish their goals. Whether it's opening a single franchise territory or whether, they're looking at purchasing a 3-pack or a 5-pack of a franchise concept. We're there to work with them on the funding from that very first location, from the very first territory, all the way through to the opening of their license.
Yeah, and I know that about, Benetrends and the process that, you guys have in place over there. It's very tailored to the individual. And I think that's something that, I know a lot of people that I've introduced to Benetrends, and you've been able to help them, get the funding that they need to get into business for themselves. And I've always heard nothing but positive feedback. And, a lot of that feedback's driven by the fact that, these people felt like they were really getting the best option for them. And, we're going to get into some of it today, but there are a lot of different options out there, and there's definitely not a one size fits all approach. I mean, there are people with different financial circumstances when they come into this. And then there are, many different types of businesses to invest in that require different amounts of capital. So, the fact that a company like Benetrends has so many different options that they can explore with someone, and once they get to know that person and, where they're coming from, what their goals are, they can match them up with a program that's perfect for them. And, not all of the companies out there, that provide funding are able to do that. So that's something that's always really stood out to me when it comes to Benetrends. So, no, that's a really good overview. So, I know one of the questions that, probably people listening in have is, what are some of the different options? And I'd like to get into some of these in more detail, but maybe just give a good overview of, what some of the options are for someone that is looking at investing in a franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the most conventional way that people go about financing a franchise purchase is by using a government guaranteed loan program out there. It's known as the SBA 7A loan program. Right? So whenever you hear about people who are borrowing money to purchase a franchise, I'd be willing to bet that 99% plus are borrowing through the SBA, at least for their first couple of franchise locations.
Right.
So we could talk a little bit about that SBA program and really the capacity in which that, Benetrends works with people in setting up that SBA financing. SBA financing is not the only financing out there that's available to individuals. There are some banks out there that will fund these franchise purchases conventionally, and we'll talk a little bit about what it would take to acquire conventional financing. There are certain brands out there that do not qualify for SBA financing, so you have to go the conventional route. I know you have a couple of brands in your inventory who have that exact situation, right? And we created some funding programs for those brands. But outside of SBA financing, there's a couple of other programs that Benetrends offers. Our founder is the architect of a program that is commonly known as the ROBS arrangement, and that's ROBS, stands for Rollover for Business Startups. Sounds terrible, but the acronym makes an awful lot of sense. It perfectly describes the program. But we are the architect of that program at Benetrends Financial, and that is a program that allows people to utilize pre-tax retirement money for the purchase or startup of their business without tax or penalty, right? So oftentimes when people are thinking about funding a franchise, they're looking at what their most valuable assets are. And for those that have worked in corporate America for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, more often than not, one of their most valuable assets is their retirement account, right? So we help them use those pre-tax dollars to buy a business through the ROBS program. And then, outside of the ROBS, if somebody has the ability to come to the table with a little bit more cash, we are also the architects of what is known as the RAP program. And that's, again, it's another acronym. It's RAP. And what a lot of accountants are now calling this program is the Roth Appreciation and Protection Plan. We call it the Rainmaker Advantage Plan. But that is a program that is built around an exit strategy. And the exit strategy is that it will eventually allow somebody to sell their franchise without any tax consequences whatsoever.
Wow.
So
That's
for a
huge.
little bit more of a sophisticated investor, that might be an approach that we take. And we have to set the business up in a specific way at the onset to allow them to eventually exit without tax consequences. But that program solves a number of different, problems that some financial advisors will encounter. So that has been really well received in that financial advising space and in the accounting space. And then outside of those programs, I mean, there are some others out there that Benetrends doesn't necessarily offer, but we've created some relationships with providers of other services like unsecured lines of credit. People can always go the home equity line of credit route. Those are things that we'll discuss with people. And sometimes those programs make a little bit more sense.
Yeah. And again, it's all about the individual. And again, that's what I like so much about a company like Benetrends. I mean, we just heard, several different options and very different options. I mean, I think most people, when they do think about getting capital to start a business, they think about borrowing money, through an SBA loan. And, we'll get into it in a minute, but even within SBA, there are different types of loans that, again, depending on the person and the investment, one may be a better fit than the other. But there are some people that they really don't want to take on any debt in the process. And, they've got, a nice 401k or IRA that they've built up over their career in corporate America. And you have programs where they can leverage that without the tax penalties and use
Yeah.
that to invest in a business instead of taking on debt. And then, as you mentioned, for the more sophisticated investor, and I think anyone looking to get into business for themselves should always be thinking about their exit strategy, right? I mean, even if it's 15, 20 years down the road, you need to be thinking about it. So you've got some programs where, someone that's really, really focused on that exit strategy as they're coming into the business, they can reap some tax benefits when they are ready to sell their business and exit. So um, let's talk a little bit about the process that you go through with someone, to help them figure out which of these programs might be the best fit for them. And then I'd like to talk in a little more detail about each of the programs so our listeners can get a better sense of each of them. But, if you get introduced to someone, what's kind of the process that you would take them through to really understand which option might be best for them?
Yeah. So I think, just like with just about any sales process, right, or any financing process, my process is guided by some of the questions that I ask, right? I want to get an understanding of who the candidate is, what they're looking to accomplish, right? Are we just considering a single territory? What kind of franchise brands are we considering, and what is that level of investment? Talk a little bit about what they're anticipating on the exit, or if they're even concerned with the exit. Some people
Right.
are more concerned with just getting into business in the first place.
Yep.
But those are things that we want to discuss. And then I want to talk about what somebody's appetite is for debt and what their tolerance is for debt, right? And that's usually the way that I phrase it, because we do work with certain individuals who would rather leverage to the hilt, right? They'd rather have as little skin in the game as possible and borrow as much of somebody else's money as they possibly can in
Yep.
funding their own business. And I'll be honest with you, right now in this current lending environment, I get it. Money is cheap,
Yeah.
right? So makes a ton of sense. And then we work with some other individuals who, maybe they're a little bit later, in their careers or in their life, and they don't want to take on any debt. Right? They don't want to be responsible for that. They want to self-fund as much of the project as possible. And for those individuals, we'll look at some different ways that allow them to self-fund more of this project and mitigate their tax exposure. But one of the things that I typically recommend, right off the bat, and I know you and I have done this with a number of your clients, is a simple pre-qualification for financing.
Yep.
Right? And the reason I always recommend that is, through Benetrends, the client's not going to pay anything for a pre-qualification. We're not going to have to hard pull their credit. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to sit down and we're going to take a look at kind of a client's balance sheet, right? We're going to take a look at their assets. We're going to take a look at their liabilities, what's coming into the household versus what's going out. And we'll try to help them get an understanding as to how much money they could borrow if they wanted to borrow, right? So at least get that out of the way up front so that the client has an understanding of, hey, if I did need to borrow, I know I can borrow up to X. And I know for certain consultants like yourself, that might even help you show them different brands that they otherwise might not have considered.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. I mean, I think that should be one of the first things done for anyone that's interested in buying a franchise business is go get that pre-qualification. As you just mentioned, it's not going to cost you anything. It's not going to impact your credit, but that will give you an idea of what your options are. And then for someone in my role that's consulting people and helping them find a business that's a great fit for them, it's going to give me some guidance in terms of which options we should really be exploring because some, not everyone would be qualified for, and then there are some people that would be qualified for just about anything out there, so there's more options to explore. So yeah, I'm a big believer, and I try to coach everyone that I work with, at the very least, go get that pre-qualification very early into this process, because that gives us a much better idea of what opportunities we want to really take a deep dive and take a closer look at.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I always recommend the pre-qual up front. And it is a 24-hour turnaround time from
Yeah,
when
it's
somebody
quick.
submits their assessment. We'll have that pre-qual done pretty quickly for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through it myself. It's a very quick turnaround. It's painless. It doesn't take a whole lot of your time. So there's really no reason not to go ahead and at the very least get that pre-qualification. And then you've also got a relationship with a company like Benetrend. So as we get further into the investigative process and you start narrowing in, on a brand or maybe a couple of brands that are really of interest to you, you've already got the ball rolling, and it's not going to drastically extend the timeline for being able to actually make the purchase. So I think that's great advice. So really comprehensive process tailored to the individual that you're working with. So once you've gotten to know someone, let's say you're working with a candidate that seems to be a better fit for like an SBA loan. What do you do
Mhm.
from there? What are some of the different options under the SBA umbrella that you would explore, with a candidate that you're working with?
Yeah. So I can touch on that a little bit, right? So I think the most important thing to understand is what is an SBA loan and why is the money so available, right? So the SBA 7A loan program is a government guaranteed loan program that is specifically designed for business startups. But I'd say really over the last couple of years, the program's almost become tailor made for franchise acquisitions.
Yeah.
And the reason that people borrow SBA money and the reason that SBA money is more available sometimes than just a conventional business loan is because the government backs up to 75% of the loan. Okay, so the government guarantees up to 75% of the loan, and SBA money is a way for banks to mitigate their risk in funding a startup,
Right.
right? So just like people are mitigating their risk in starting a business by investing into a franchise system, the SBA program is a way for banks to mitigate their risk in funding a startup business, or what is essentially a startup business. So that is why that money is so available, and that's why so many people tend to start with SBA money. But if they end up, funding a number of different franchise businesses or a number of different businesses, it's not always SBA money that you're going to have to borrow. But I figured I would touch on that just because people throw that term SBA around, and sometimes they really don't understand why it is that they have to borrow from the SBA.
Right. No, I think
Right?
that's great background.
Yeah, and the capacity in which Benetrends works with people, I think the most important thing to understand about what Benetrends is doing, Benetrends by definition is not a bank or not a direct lender. Really, what Benetrends is more of a loan consultant, right? A lot of people call us loan brokers, and frankly, I'm fine with that label.
Yeah.
But I think really, if you break down what we do, it's kind of similar to what you're doing on the franchise consulting side,
Very
right? We're a
similar.
matchmaker,
Yes.
right? So we have a network of about 150 banks all throughout North America that all have different appetites for different types of businesses, right? There are some banks out there that love food. There are others that hate it.
Right.
You've got some banks out there that love educational services, right? You've got banks out there that love fitness, right? I can't tell you how many fitness concepts I've funded over the last couple of years.
I know.
So every bank's credit box is a little bit different. They've all got different appetites for different types of concepts. And our goal is to help a candidate find not just a single lender that's interested in financing their project, but to eventually connect them with anywhere between 2 and 6 different banks interested in financing whatever franchise they're purchasing through you, right? And then we will pit those lenders against one another, create a little bit of a competitive bidding situation for the
Absolutely.
candidate's business. And that way the candidate is seeing some of the most aggressive terms out there in that SBA lending environment. And then not only does Benetrends connect these different, buyers with these different lenders, they will also guide the buyer and the borrower through the closing process with whatever bank the client chooses to proceed with, right? So again,
Yes.
it is truly consultative in nature. We're going to bring these different lenders to the borrower, and we're going to let the borrower make the decision as to who they want to use to finance the project. Now, more often than not, they're going to use the bank that's offering the cheapest money, right?
Sure.
So we'll kind of walk them through that. But we will continue to work with that client and with that borrower through the closing process to make sure they've received their approval and can actually finance and open up the business.
Well, absolutely. And you are able to create some competition amongst the lenders, driving the interest rates down. So you're really able to help your clients get a better rate, especially, versus them going out and trying to navigate this whole process themselves. And, it can be a tricky process to navigate, just like, finding and investigating a franchise business. So, for them to have someone coaching them and consulting them through this entire process, I mean, to me, it's invaluable. I would never dream of going out and trying to navigate this process on my own. I would 100% work with an expert like yourself, someone that's been through it so many times. Not only is it going to speed it up, it's going to eliminate, anything from falling through the cracks or me making a mistake that could potentially jeopardize the loan or result in, me having to pay more money over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing to consider, right, is let's say you're working with an emerging franchise brand, right? And there aren't any of those franchises in your market. The likelihood that you're going to walk into your local bank and work with a loan underwriter and work with a business development officer from that bank that understands the franchise concept is slim to none, right?
Yeah.
So that's really, where I think it makes sense to work with a financing specialist and work with a financing specialist that can connect you with lenders that we know are going to be franchise friendly.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. And I've seen it too many times where, someone looking to buy a franchise, their first step was to go to, their local credit union. I've done business with them forever. We've got a great relationship. This will be easy. So rarely do those types of institutions actually understand franchising. And I'm not saying that you can't ever get a loan for it, but it's much more difficult because they're just typically not that well versed in franchising and how it works. A lot of times it's almost a foreign concept to them, especially if you're looking at a franchise that's outside of what I would say most people think of when they think of franchising, which is, usually food of some sorts. When I was at Shelf Genie, it's very different from a food franchise, right? It's custom pull-out shelving, and I can just imagine the look on some of these bankers' face when a candidate would go in there and they're like, "Wait, you're gonna do what? You want to do what do they do?" I think that's a really good point. And then within SBA, you've got some different options, right? Depending on the client you're working with and also what they are looking to invest in.
Yeah. So I can touch on, kind of what a standard SBA loan looks like.
Yeah.
And then within that standard SBA 7A loan program, there are some different thresholds to be aware of. So within the 7A, basically we can help to finance any project between $50,000 and $5 million, right? Maximum exposure through the SBA 7A is $5 million.
Okay.
Now, I think, again, and we talk a little bit about misconceptions, I think a lot of people have this misconception that in order to get SBA financing, you've got to be looking at a franchise that's got a seven-figure, ticket price on it.
Yeah.
And that's not the case whatsoever. I know within your inventory, there are, at least 50 brands, if not 100 or 100 plus, that are probably an investment range of anywhere between $50,000 and maybe $350,000. Right?
Yeah.
So you can get into a franchise for a pretty reasonable price. When it comes to what you can expect, to see on a term sheet from a bank whenever you're looking into an SBA loan, I would say that typically banks are willing to finance anywhere from 70 to 80% of the investment, right? And in this market, finding lenders out there that are willing to finance up to 80% of the project should not be all that difficult. We've got some lenders that might even get a little bit more aggressive than that. But I'd say most banks will finance about 80% of the investment. If it is truly an emerging brand, the lender may want to see a little bit more skin in the game.
Right.
So the cash injection, might bump from 20,000 up to 30,000, or I'm sorry, not 20,000, but 20%.
But if you're using a round number example, if the investment's 100,000 and the bank's going to finance 80% of it, you need to come to the table with 20,000. That's your cash injection.
Yeah, typically yes. When it comes to interest rates on SBA loans, again, this is another reason that people tend to want to use SBA money. The federal government actually places a cap on the amount of interest that banks are allowed to charge.
Mm-hmm.
But that rate cap is always going to be predicated on whatever the Wall Street Journal prime rate is. So that rate cap is always going to be set at prime plus 2.75%.
Okay.
I know rates have fallen a number of times over the last year and a half, but I believe right now the prime rate is sitting at 4.75, which means that interest rates are capped at 7.5%.
Okay.
So this is really cheap money
Yeah.
in the realm of SBA financing. These are some of the cheapest rates that we've seen over the last decade. And what we're seeing in terms of rates from banks are rates that range from, I'd say 6% up to about 7.5%. It's pretty consistent. And more than likely, the term on that loan is going to be equivalent to the length of the franchise agreement, right? And I know you'll speak with your clients about this as well, but more often than not, the length of the franchise agreement is about 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So typically, you see a 10-year term on the loan, but there's never a prepayment penalty on these loans, right? So borrowers can pay off the loans as aggressively as they'd like, right? And again, something else to make SBA money that much more desirable, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of what you're looking at with that standard SBA loan. But you actually just touched on it, right? What if the investment is pretty small,
Yeah.
right? And I know this was the case with Shelf Genie, right?
Yep.
Which is where you and I had initially worked with a number of clients together. So within the SBA 7A loan program, there is a specific program known as the SBA Express loan, right? And these are loans that are designed for projects that are anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000. And it's a little bit of a program that's a little bit more geared towards the service-based businesses, right? The non-brick and mortar concept. So man in a van, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
right? But what it is it's basically a working capital loan, right? So there's a number of banks that participate in this program, and there's certain lenders that offer this program and do a better job of it than other lenders throughout the country, and a couple of national lenders that do this pretty well. But basically, 2/3 of the underwriting on loans that are between $50,000 and $150,000 has already been completed with the lenders that offer this program, right? So the underwriting process moves a little bit faster.
Yep.
Typically, you're looking at a 30 to 45-day closing process, and the application that must be submitted to the banks is a little bit more abbreviated, right? It's a little bit less paperwork that needs to be checked.
Yep.
The other major aspect of this program is that the cash injection requirement typically falls from 20 to 30% down to 10.
Yep.
Right. So on loans up to $150,000, so long as there's no brick and mortar build out for the concept, your cash injection could be as little as 10%.
Yep.
And the other major aspect of this program is that they're typically only leaning against business assets. So you don't have to provide personal collateral on the SBA Express program. Which
you would with a typical SBA loan, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's a fantastic program. I know a lot of people that have leveraged an SBA Express loan to get into a business. Again, it's not necessarily going to work for every business, but if it's a lower investment, and as Storm pointed out, there are a lot of fantastic opportunities out there, that would fall below the $150,000 investment threshold. And it's a much quicker process. I've seen it happen very quickly, 30 days. It's not that difficult to get approved, and your cash injection is so much less. The other thing that differentiates it, correct me if I'm wrong, but because you said it's really more of a working capital loan. So, someone that gets that, say they get the full amount of 150,000, they get the money and then they do what they need to do with the money. So if some of that money needs to go to franchise fees, great, they pay the franchise fees. If some of that money needs to just go into their business account for working capital, cool. With a traditional SBA loan, especially the higher they get in their amount, SBA is really directing where that money goes, right? So if the client says, hey, the franchise fees are 120,000, well, SBA is going to pay the franchise fees directly. And, hey, my
Yep.
down payment on a lease is, 60,000. They're going to pay the 60,000 directly to that. So with the SBA Express loan, you've got a little more flexibility with what you're actually using the funds for.
That's correct. That's correct. And like you said, there are so many different brands out there whose franchisees almost exclusively utilize that SBA Express program. And I know that's something that you'll probably touch on in other podcasts, or, what are some of these service brands that are exploding in popularity? But a number of the brands that we've worked with over at Benetrends over the last couple of years, their franchisees are almost using that exclusively across the board.
Well, and so many people are not aware of this. I mean, I remember when I would, and I'm certainly not the expert, but when I would have a candidate at Shelf Genie that I felt was ideal for an express loan, I'd kind of explain it to them, and then I'd introduce them to someone like yourself that can really explain it to them. But I mean, their eyes would light up when they're like, really? That's an option? There's a program out there like this? And
Yep.
it can be used as working capital. I've seen some people do the 150 or whatever amount under 150 for the express loan, and then maybe they've rolled over a portion of their 401k, or they had some capital on hand that they used to pay the upfront investment, and now they're getting this pretty inexpensive money with no personal collateral to back it, and that's their working capital for the business instead of having to tap into more of their own capital. So again, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about doing this, and that's what a company like Benetrends is going to do. Is they're going to help you look at all your options, explain your options to you, and then put together a program that makes the most sense for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. The more money you borrow, the more strict the guidelines become on the SBA's path. And that's not designed to make the process more difficult. It's designed to protect the borrower, right?
Sure.
And it's designed to make sure that the project that they have submitted for financing stays in that range of the investment that the borrower is anticipating, right? So again, these are all rules that have been developed and modified and created over time to help protect the borrower and help make sure the business gets off on the right foot.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point to make. It does get a little more stringent, but it's all in the interests of the borrower. And, the other point to kind of raise here is, again, the consultation aspect of what Benetrends is able to do, because, when you get into applying for these loans, I mean, there's a lot of paperwork, but you're also usually having to submit business plans and all of that sort of thing. And that's where a company like Benetrends can really help you navigate that process. And then, if you're looking at a franchise business, they've already got a business model, right? So it's not like you're going to have to create a business plan from scratch to submit to SBA. Usually the franchisor is going to be able to give you some help with that. Benetrends can help you navigate that process. So it really does just make it a much smoother and quicker, process to get the funding that you need so you can get into business and then, start building the business.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And, we will work with them through the pre-qualification, through the creation of that SBA loan application that's being submitted to the banks. We'll go find them the lenders, and then with whatever lender they decide to work with, we're going to walk them through that closing process. I say it's matchmaking, but really when you take a look at the service that we're providing, we're more so advocates for funding than anything else. That's really what I would liken the service to.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. So that's a great overview of, SBA. Now let's talk about someone that, maybe doesn't want to take on any debt.
Yeah.
And you've already hit on a few of these options, and again, this is one that I like talking about because so many people are not aware of some of these options. And when they learn about them, they're like, again, their eyes light up. They're like, wow, really? I can do that? So, hit on, you mentioned the ROBS program earlier. That's one that, I've worked with a lot of people that have leveraged the ROBS program to get into business. So maybe go into a little bit more detail about that and who might be, who would the ROBS program potentially be a good fit for?
Sure, sure. So the ROBS program has kind of been the foundation on what Benetrends is built, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our founder is a gentleman by the name of Len Fisher. Len is an ERISA attorney by education, and he is the architect of the program. So this was something that he first put together all the way back in 1982. And basically what happened was he had a friend who came to him who was looking to start a business. He had an awful lot of money that he had saved up in a profit sharing plan, and he wanted to figure out a way to take that money and basically invest it into a business, but he didn't want to pay the taxes and penalties associated with pulling that money out of the retirement account as a distribution, right? So really what the program is it is a way for somebody to take those pre-tax dollars and use that money tax-deferred, penalty-free for the purchase or startup of their own business, right? And if you take a look at some of the taxes and penalties that are associated with taking a distribution from the plan, what it helps people avoid is if they are under the age of 59 and a half, they're going to be subject to a 10% early withdrawal penalty on that distribution, right? And then on top of that, they would be subject to state and federal income taxes, right? So that money that they take as a distribution from the plan is going to count as ordinary income for them for that fiscal year, right? So in certain states, and depending on the distribution that you take, you could lose, up to like 50 to 55% of the money that's sitting in the retirement account, taking it as an early distribution. And that's the problem that the program helps to solve, right? So that's the program that we created. At Benetrends, they call it the Rainmaker program. That's what they've called it since 1982. And then I want to say maybe 15 years ago, somebody that worked for the IRS who apparently had a sense of humor decided they wanted to create an acronym for this thing, and they decided to dub this the ROBS program, right? Which sounds awful, but it stands for Rollover for Business Startup, and that is exactly what the program allows people to do, right? It allows them to roll over their retirement money for the purchase or startup of their business. Who the program tends to make the most sense for are corporate refugees, right? Or people who are looking for an eventual exit strategy from corporate America, right? These are people that have been diligently saving, and maybe they've been receiving an employee match in a 401k over the course of the last 10, 15, 20 years. And sometimes, if somebody's bouncing from employer to employer, they're going to roll that money over into an IRA, and that money will continue to grow for them, right? So those are the types of individuals that we tend to see utilizing the program. Right? And more often than not, this is not a program where people are dumping their entire IRA or their entire 401k into a business, right?
That was my next question. Do you have to use all of the funds?
You don't. So really what this is more of a diversification tool, right? This is a way to take some money out of the market and not subject it to, kind of the ebbs and flows of the economy. And it allows you to take some of that pre-tax money and make a more direct investment into yourself by taking the money and buying your own business with it, right? So if somebody's sitting on an IRA or a 401k and they've got $1 million in there, more often than not, they're not rolling over $1 million. More often than not, they're going to roll over 100,000, 200,000, maybe 250,000, and then again, there's a way to take that money and use that to leverage SBA financing if you want to go that way, right? But that's how people are utilizing the program.
And then you still have the bulk of your retirement funds. It's going to keep growing the way that it has been. And, I like the point you brought up earlier where, for corporate refugees, maybe you've been, laid off or your company's been reorganized. So you're in a transition mode. But, there's a lot of people, and I've worked with some people where, they're looking to lay the groundwork for their eventual exit strategy, but they still have a job. And there's some great franchise opportunities out there that are what you might call semi-absentee models where, the franchise owner can keep their full-time job. They're going to usually have a manager or a team of managers in place kind of running the day-to-day of the franchise business. This is a perfect program for someone looking to do that because, depending on, how long they've been in the corporate world, they probably have a sizable asset in their 401k. They can take a portion of it, invest it in a business. Now they've got an exit strategy in the works. They continue investing in their 401k, build it back up pretty quickly. And, now you've got cash flow plus an asset that you're building, a new asset that you didn't have before, and you still have your 401k as an asset. I mean, it's a perfect option for someone in that position. And that's another misconception that, a lot of people I work with have is, well, if I'm going to get into a franchise business, I have to quit my job and do it full time. And there are definitely franchise businesses out there where the franchise owner needs to be working in the business full time, but not all of them. There are a lot of great businesses out there where the role of the owner is, semi-absentee or even absentee in some cases. So I love that you brought that point up. And again, this is something that most people are not aware of. Most people have no idea that there's a program like this out there where they can leverage money from their 401k, not take any of the tax penalties, and use it to start a business.
Yeah, and here's the deal. I'm guilty of that, right? So coming from wealth management as a guy who had his securities licenses, I had never heard of the ROBS program. And frankly, when I was first approached about it, I didn't think it was possible. But really, if you simplify the program, what it is it's an investment in qualified employer securities, which is it's an investment option. It's a provision that's built into the retirement plans of so many different publicly traded companies. And when you realize that that's really what the ROBS program, relies on, you realize it's a pretty straightforward setup. It would kind of walk you through, what that setup entails, from incorporation through moving the money from the retirement plan into the business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think the easiest way to do this is to break the program down into 4 steps. And what I really like about each of these 4 steps is that independent of one another, each of these steps are very common things that we're doing here. It's just that once you tie them all together and kind of put them into this one vehicle, what you end up with is this, let's call it ingenious way of using pre-tax money to fund your own business, right? As opposed to using the money to fund somebody else's. And that's really what your money is doing for you when you have it invested in an IRA or an 401k. But the first step, whenever we're working with a client who wants to utilize the ROBS program, is to simply incorporate them, right? So if they're opening a business in the state of North Carolina, what we're going to do is we're going to file their articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State in North Carolina, and we're going to establish a brand new C corporation for them to operate the business out of. So it is a specific entity that we need to set up for the franchise, and for the purpose of the ROBS arrangement, the type of entity we need to establish is a C corporation, right? So Benetrends will incorporate the client, right? And they'll provide them with their corporate bylaws. They'll provide them with a minute book. They're going to obtain an EIN for the corporation, right? That's an employment identification number. And then they'll even provide banking instructions that allow the client to open up a corporate checking account for the business. Okay. So that's all included in that initial incorporation process. Once the client is incorporated, the second step that we need to take is to design a brand new qualified retirement plan for the client, right? Okay. And this is really the crux of what the ROBS program is. I never really liked that term, the ROBS program, because it fails to highlight what allows the ROBS program to be compliant, and it's a retirement plan. So I always like calling them ROBS retirement plans. Okay. So we'll design a qualified retirement plan for the corporation. And again, this is a step that the client has some flexibility with, right? We could set them up in a profit sharing plan. We could set them up in a 401k plan. It could be a hybrid of the two. And for some clients, a defined benefit plan makes a little bit more sense. So they'll work with a retirement plan design expert who will walk them through the different advantages to setting up the plan, each of these different ways, and we will custom build that qualified retirement plan for the client. Okay. So once the client's incorporated, once we've got that plan set up for them, the third step is the actual rollover, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take some of that money that's sitting in the IRA or in the 401k, and the client will designate how much money they want to roll over, and we will have those funds rolled over from the existing retirement account into that new qualified plan, right? And the key there is that this is a rollover, right? It's not a distribution. So there's no taxable event that takes place, or just moving money from one plan to the other. And then once that money has been rolled over from the existing plan into the new C Corporation's retirement plan, there's only one thing left for the client to do. It's invest their money, right? But instead of working backwards and dumping that money into an index fund, right, or a mutual fund, or instead of buying stock in, Apple, Google, Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, whoever it might be, what they'll do is purchase the stock of their own privately held C corporation, right? And what occurs there is a transfer of cash in the retirement plan for stock in the corporation. So that money ends up being wired from their plan straight into their corporate checking account. And then in exchange, the plan is going to receive ownership in the corporation. And then once that money hits the corporate checking account, that money is no longer considered a retirement plan asset. That's a corporate asset. And as such, they have the ability to use that money for any legitimate business expense, right? So things like paying franchise fees, purchasing equipment, it could be used for inventory, marketing,
payroll,
leasehold improvements, payroll, you name it. Absolutely.
That's brilliant. I mean, it really is. It's a brilliant, and like you said, each of those steps individually are very, very common, but it's when you package them all together for this purpose, that's what really does make it ingenious. And, it's totally legal. It's not like a loophole or anything. It's really just, understanding how it all works and then how you can package it together. And, you can see though, through listening to you explain each of those steps, why it is so valuable to have, a consultant that understands this process, kind of guide you through it. How long does the process typically take? So from the time you say, all right, yes, I want to, leverage the Rob's program, till they actually have funds in their corporate checking account that they can start using, what's the typical timeline for that process?
So that's a beautiful thing. Really simplifies the funding timeline. You're looking at somewhere between 20 and 30 days from start to finish.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a beautiful option for a lot of people. It's not the best option for everyone, obviously, but there's a lot of people out there where, this is a great option. And that's, a big part of why I was so excited to have you come on today, because again, there's just not a whole lot of awareness out there, for people. I mean, I had lunch with my financial advisor a couple of days ago, and, I think very highly of him, but I was, doing my best to explain the Rob's program to him, and he wasn't aware.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a lot of, I think, education that needs to happen in terms of what people's options are, when they are looking to invest in a business. And just to make sure, the listeners are clear, this is an option, even if you continue your employment with the company that you're currently working with.
So that is correct. The only note that I would add to that is, in order for us to move money from somebody's retirement plan, it either needs to be already rolled over into some type of IRA, or it needs to be sitting in a 401k from a past employer. There are not too many plans that exist right now in corporate America that would allow somebody to roll money out of their current employer's retirement plan and over into another qualified account. So it needs to be sitting in some type of IRA or some type of 401k. The nice thing that we've really seen over the last couple of years is there have been some major corporations that have changed their retirement plan and changed custodians for managing that plan. So there are a number of clients that we've worked with that have had the option to roll money out because their corporate retirement plan has changed, and then they've taken that money and used that to buy a business while they continue to maintain their employment. And again, it's just a way to diversify how you're investing that retirement money. And
Yep.
then by choosing to invest that retirement money in a franchise, you're now creating a different income stream for yourself. So
Absolutely.
it is an ultimate diversification tool.
Okay. So if I had a corporate employer and I'm actively contributing to a 401k, if I wanted to use the Rob's program to fund a franchise business, I would first need to roll a portion of my 401k into an IRA, and that would be the funds that
That's
would
correct.
ultimately end up in my corporate account with the C corp. Okay. Yep.
That's correct.
It's a great program. All right, so let's talk about some of the other options, though. You mentioned the RAP program. Who is that usually an ideal program for, and maybe give us a little more detail on how that works.
Yes. So this is a little bit of a newer program that we've introduced, and I've got to give Franchoice a shout out because the first ever official RAP program that Benetrin set up was through a Franchoice consultant. It was an individual who purchased a six-pack of a boutique fitness concept. And really, this is a program that's designed for somebody who has a little bit more cash that they can bring to the table. Right now, that they do need to have a small amount of retirement money available for the program to work. And I'm not going to dive into the mechanics of this program. It's a little bit more complicated. But the program is designed for somebody who has a little bit more cash to bring to the table. It involves the use of a post-tax retirement account, specifically a Roth 401k plan.
Okay.
And eventually, when the client grows the business, it allows them to sell the business and avoid tax consequences on the sale of their business altogether, right? So for anybody that is looking to, kind of build a small empire, right? And I'll give you an example of who this program made sense for. And again, this was another individual I worked with from a Franchoice consultant, but this individual wanted to purchase a 5-pack of a beauty concept. And this guy was a little bit more of a sophisticated business owner. His goal was to eventually open up 5 of these, get them to a point where they would be valued at somewhere between $5 and $6 million, and eventually sell off all 5 as a package deal. And he was looking for ways to mitigate his tax exposure on the sale. And I kind of introduced this program and said, hey, if you're able to structure it this way up front, this is the tax exposure you'd be looking at on the back end. There's a way to take the proceeds and there's a way to take all that appreciation that occurs as somebody grows their business and move that money all into a post-tax retirement account and avoid taxes on the back end. And that's exactly what the RAP program is about. I've put together some videos that kind of walk people through the program. So if anybody is interested in that, I'm happy to share that information with them. It's difficult to explain unless I can actually diagram it. For somebody, it's a little bit more complicated. There's a few more steps involved. But a program that has made sense for more and more individuals, especially with the low unemployment numbers right now.
Right.
People tend to have a little bit more cash on hand. So that program has picked up an awful lot of steam over the last couple of years.
Well, we'll link the videos in the show notes so anyone can check those out. And just for anyone listening in, when Storm says 5-pack or 6-pack, that means someone's investing in, 5 units or locations for a particular franchise brand, in case you're not familiar with that terminology. And there are some amazing opportunities out there for, people that are looking to make a bigger investment and really, build an empire and build a very large business that are really kind of well suited for what you might call multi-unit development and franchisees. And, that's another thing I wanted to hit on. And it sounds like the RAP program could be a good option for someone that, coming into this knows they want to invest in multiple units. What are some of the other options that, you could explore with someone that's, maybe got a little more capital and they're looking to build multiple units with a franchise?
Yeah, so more often than not, and I know you know this, and I know the team over at Franchoice knows this, more often than not, the conversation will start with, hey, how do I fund one of these things, right?
Right.
And then if you're interested, what does the financing strategy look like if I want to finance 3 of these, 5 of these, 10 of these, right? So we do work with a lot of people who end up becoming multi-unit franchisees because they are purchasing businesses that are very scalable, right?
Yep.
So the 2 programs that I just referenced, being the ROBS and the RAP program, both of them are often used in conjunction with some type of financing vehicle when it comes to multi-unit financing, right? So the thing I think to really understand about multi-unit financing, the thing that is going to be most important is to maintain a strong liquidity position as you go from financing unit number 1 to unit number 2 to unit number 3, right? We want to utilize as much of the bank's money as we can up front. So that way, if you need to self-fund more of the subsequent projects, that money is still available, right? A lot of people, when I initially speak to them, they think that what makes a little bit more sense is to self-fund as much of that first location as possible and not take on debt until they're ready to jump to unit number 2 or until they're ready to jump to unit number 3. But more often than not, they don't have any cash left over. They're not sitting in as strong of a liquidity position.
Right.
So from the bank's perspective, they don't have as strong of a position to repay that loan if the business doesn't cash flow immediately, right? So that is one of the walls that we tend to have to break down as a funding consultant, is to make sure that we take into account the bigger picture, right? Their long-term goals in opening multiple locations. So borrowing more money up front is paramount to their success in finding financing for those subsequent locations, right? So those are some of the things that we discuss as a funding consultant. That, and making sure that they're working with a bank that has funded multi-unit franchisees before and understands what it takes from a borrower's perspective to get to owning multiple locations. Again, one of the things that I cannot stress enough, for anybody who's purchasing 3, 5, 10, 10 plus, how you finance those first couple of locations. I know this sounds ridiculous, but how you fund those first couple will determine your success in opening those subsequent locations down the line.
Well, it's such a good point. And, you do want to make sure you're working with a bank that understands, how these things work, because there's usually a schedule involved. And I mean, to your point, I've seen it happen where, hey, this is the plan, over X number of years, we're going to open 5 locations, but 2-3 years into it, they weren't using their funds appropriately in those initial years. And, it either delayed the schedule, or in some cases, it can even prevent you from opening those additional locations.
Yeah. And I'll give you an example. Right now, I am currently working on helping a client secure financing for his second and third locations. And this was an individual that did not come to us, was not referred to us for the funding of his first location. He worked with a bank, and he has a development schedule that he needs to follow, and that bank was not willing to finance his second and third location, even though the first one is cash flowing, right? So he was working with a bank that didn't have an understanding of what multi-unit financing takes, and that's fine. So he was referred back over to us, and this is a boutique fitness brand, and I now have him connected with a regional lender, right, that really loves that boutique fitness arena. And he was blown away at the fact that this bank is committing to funding his second and third location when he couldn't get his first bank to commit to more than one, right? So again, I cannot stress enough the importance of working with a financing provider and a financing specialist that understands what a multi-unit financing strategy could and should look like, and being able to connect the borrower with banks who are also going to be willing to work with the client through the opening of multiple locations. I really do. I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, I agree. That's great advice. And again, where someone like yourself and a company like Benetrends is going to be able to help someone navigate this process and avoid some of the pitfalls that, people commonly fall into when it comes to funding. So, anything else that you would, want to hit on when it comes to multi-unit investing?
No, I would say that more often than not, the way that people are utilizing it, or the way that people are completing, multi-unit financing strategies, is through a combination of the different programs, right? So a lot of people tend to want to hold on to their cash. They'll utilize their pre-tax retirement money through the ROBS program to make cash injections, and then borrow through the SBA for the balance in funding, individual locations. So that's become kind of a recipe for success in us working with people. If people have the cash on hand and they can just go ahead and stroke a check and cover the down payments for each of these, I mean, that's absolutely one way to do it. But more often than not, people who have paid taxes on that cash already prefer to hold on to that and use the pre-tax money, and make the government assume some of that risk and some of that investment that they're making, and then they're borrowing government guaranteed money from the SBA program. It becomes a pretty efficient way for somebody to go about financing a multi-unit franchise purchase.
When I love talking about multiple units. I mean, in my wife and I's franchise business, we have multiple units, and, you know, it definitely creates the opportunity for continued growth and more scalability. And every franchise model is a little bit different. We don't have, brick and mortar locations in our franchise business. We have territories instead. But that's something I'm always trying to, bring into the conversation when I work with people is, hey, how do you want to be able to grow, your business over time? I think so often people come into something like this thinking, all right, I just want to get into business. And then, once I'm in business, it might be easier to fund the growth of the business. But, I've just seen firsthand, it's very important that, if you want a scalable opportunity that's going to have continued potential for growth, you need to be thinking about some of these things up front, because in many cases it can be better to go ahead and set yourself up from a funding standpoint to do multiple units, even if you're not actually opening those additional units for 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. You're in a better position to be able to do that if you come into it knowing that that's the plan. And so that's something that's, I think, a bit counterintuitive for some people in my experience. Is they're like, well, I just want to get my first location open, and then, we'll figure it out. And once I have some cash flow, it'll be easy to get the money. And it's not always the case. And that example you just gave is a perfect illustration of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome, man. Well, look, I really appreciate you sharing everything, on the financing side. Again, I just think there are so many different options out there. So many people that I speak with, at least initially, they don't think that they, have enough money in the bank, or that they might be able to qualify to get into the type of business that they want to. And I mean, I think you would agree with me on this. It's pretty rare, that we work with someone and can't find a business opportunity that matches up with what they're looking for, and then also make sure that they're able to secure the funding that they need to do it. It happens, but it's pretty rare, that we're not able to, kind of find a good fit all the way around for people. So I want to talk now a little bit about some transition that you have going on in your career, because clearly anyone that's listening into this, realizes you're an expert when it comes to, financing and funding, franchise businesses. But you're shifting gears a little bit in your career. And so tell us a little bit about the transition that you're going through right now.
Yeah, so I am in the process of transitioning into a little bit more of a different role. I'm stepping over to your side of the industry, if you will, and have decided to join a group called Phenom Group, and that's REPM. And really, what I'll be doing is a little bit more work on the franchise development side of the industry. So Phenom Group was a company that was founded by Rob Cambruzzi, and Rob ran Driven Brands for a number of years. So the Driven Brands concepts are your Makos, your Meinekes, your Car Stars, your Driving Styles, some of the cornerstones of franchising. Rob was their vice president of franchise development for a number of years, but recognized that in that franchise sales process, where a lot of people had some issues was after they signed a franchise agreement, actually finding a location to open up a brick and mortar business, hiring a general contractor, and then having somebody manage the construction and build out process. And that is really what Phenom started as, right? It stands for Real Estate Project Management. So over the last 3-4 years, Rob has grown that side of the business pretty substantially, and we now manage the construction and build out process for about 25 different franchise systems. And a couple of his clients had also asked him about franchise development. And we are now kind of opening up a franchise development arm to Phenom, right? So that is the side of the business that I will be heading up with another individual named Nick Sheehan, formerly of St. Gregory Development Group. And, we'll be putting our heads together. And we already have a couple of brands that we've contracted to run development for. And those brands will be launched in the franchise consulting network. And we've got a couple more brands that are kind of in the legal review process that we're hoping to be able to launch in franchise as well at your conference in July.
Yeah, it's exciting. And, so for anyone listening in, essentially what Storm and his division of Repum is going to be doing is partnering with different franchise brands and then helping them find amazing franchisees that are a good fit for the brand and bring them in. And I think it's a really good fit for you, Storm, just knowing you. And I think it's awesome that you're willing to make a transition so that you can learn a different side of franchising. You've been very successful in what you've done, on the funding side. But I respect a lot the fact that you're like, all right, well, now I'm in a position where I want to learn another side of the business. And you'll be able to take everything about how people can secure the funding that they need and apply that to your role, helping people evaluate a franchise business and determine if it's a good fit for them. And so I think that's an amazing resource that you'll be able to provide for the people that you work with that most development reps will not be able to, at least not at the same aptitude level that you will. I always handed someone off to you or someone at Benetrends as quickly as I could because I'd pretty quickly get in over my head in terms of explaining some of these different funding options to them. So you're going to bring a wealth of knowledge, on the funding side, to your role with Repum doing development now. So, and I know you guys are going to be contracted with some amazing brands that are going to be awesome opportunities. And, I have no doubt that, the brands will keep coming in because it's such a good service that you guys are providing, not only for the franchisors that you work with, but also with, the individuals that you're working with and bringing in as franchisees. So, no, I think it's really cool. I'm excited for you and definitely looking forward to, having the chance to learn more about these brands as you come into the franchise inventory. So on that note, how can people, first of all, when it comes to Benetrends, because you are transitioning out of Benetrends, how could people learn more about Benetrends and get in touch with Benetrends if they were interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the Benetrends website is a great resource for knowledge on all the different funding programs. And it's a super simple website. It's just www.benetrends.com. And if somebody, who is listening to this podcast has questions about financing and they want to ask me questions, I am still happy to answer those questions for them.
Sure.
So they can reach out to me directly, and I'll give you my cell phone number. That number is 267-471-2921. The best email address used for me right now is probably the Repum email address, which is simply smiller@repmgroup.com. But whether it's a question about some of the brands that Repum has brought on and is currently working with, or more often than not, I'm thinking people might have some questions about financing, I am still happy to share any information and any insight that I can provide. We've worked at Benetrends with about 12 to 1,300 different franchise systems.
Yeah.
And we finance these things all throughout North America. So whether it's even a Canadian who's looking for a franchise funding solution, we have programs in place to help people in Canada secure financing. And my guess is if it's a brand that somebody's looking into, I've probably encountered them before. So happy to help out in any way that I can.
Awesome, man. Well, look, I know I'll still be sending my funding related questions your way because there's no one I trust more, on that side of the business. But again, super excited for you as you make this transition. I know that you'll do a fantastic job. And then, I can connect people with Benetrends as well. That's the primary company that I tend to refer people to, as I'm working through the process with them. And we'll link all this in the show notes as well. I know you're pretty active on LinkedIn, so people can connect with you there as well. I'm going to guess there's not a whole lot of Storm Millers out there, so should be pretty easy to find. But no, man, look, thanks again for coming on. This has been awesome. I know that everyone listening in learned a lot and got a ton of value from this. I know I learned a lot just, going through this conversation with you today. So really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for joining us on the Path to Freedom podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, man. Appreciate it.
Yep.